We're going to disassemble the Hasbro interactive voice control R2-D2, and the first step was to remove the rear panel. We took the batteries out, and the first 6 screws we're going to remove from the rear of the chassis are here in the bottom. There's 2 here on each side in the middle, and 2 additional ones here on the top. We use a Phillips screwdriver to remove those first 6 screws. Once those first 6 screws have been removed, we will be able to separate the front and rear of the chassis with a little gentle prying. We can pull the legs out of the way and go ahead and separate them by clipping the 2 wires near the connector there. We probably are not going to end up needing these wires or the connectors, but that just is a quick way to get the legs out of the way. In order to begin removing wires, the next step will be to remove the 4 screws that mount the main circuit board to the body. And we can also remove these 2 screws here, which are holding the retaining strap for the dome wiring harness. And we can see once those are separated, we're able to open the chassis up a little wider and access the connections. If you have not already done so, you can also remove the center leg just by sliding it out of the slot. Setting it aside. The next step is to remove the power switch assembly from the rear of the chassis. This is what it looks like from the outside. This is where our power switch is, and it connects with 2 screws in the bottom of the chassis here. We're going to remove that board. Once the screws are removed, we're going to have a red wire that connects to the battery box, and a yellow wire, and 2 black wires. We can go ahead and cut those wires. Where you cut these wires is not really important. They're not going to be part of the final conversion. It's just necessary to get the circuit board to clear from the back of the chassis. Those 4 wires cut, you should be able to slide your assembly out. We've got a white wire there too, and you can separate the back part of the chassis away. Next, we're going to separate the power wires away from the power switch assembly. You will see a number of green and blue wires coming from the main board to the power switch assembly. along with one red wire. We want to cut all the green, blue, and red wires as close to this board as possible. So we're trying to save as much length of these wires to remain connected to the main circuit board. You don't have to worry about keeping track of them all, as they are all labeled on the main circuit board. So once you have all those snipped away and you've separated your power switch assembly, and what you have left over is this wiring harness here. It contains all your power wires and your ground wires. Next, we will unplug the remaining wires from the main circuit board and separate the main circuit board from the chassis. You see there's a number of connections here. However, they are all labeled on the main circuit board according to function, so there's no real need to keep track of them. The only exception are these two ribbon cables, which are both 10 conductor ribbon cables, and they look virtually identical. So we want to keep track of them, and the way I do that is to know that with the board oriented facing up as I have it here, with the silkscreen lettering on the board where you can read it normally, the red cable, the cable with the red index wire, would be on the top, and the cable with the blue index wire will be the one that goes on the bottom. To keep track of that, I usually take a Sharpie and I will mark red and blue next to each plug so I know which ribbon cable goes where. But we have a number of connections we're going to disconnect here. One in the lower left corner here with the orange and black wire. That's our that goes to the stay put switch that's on the front of the chassis. The large connector here with the black and red wire goes to the dome rotation motor. That one has a lock on the back that has to be held back as you unplug it. These two plugs here. The one on the left is for the stay indicator light that goes on the stay indicator switch. And the next one next to that, just to the right of that one with the black and red wire, is the speaker connection. That comes off. The next, just below that, about the center of the board here, is a 5-conductor plug that goes to the dome rotation encoder mechanism. That comes off. And then up on the upper right corner right here is the center microphone plug. That comes out. And then finally our two ribbon cables. And once those are unplugged, we freed the main board. This is the heart of the system, so protect it from static and any other physical abuse. Set it aside in a safe place. The next step is to remove the dome from the chassis. The first thing we're going to do is take apart any tape or any other wire connectors that are holding these harnesses together. We want to be able to separate our wires out so that the dome can release from the remaining parts. Once you get the tape out of the way, we have two screws. You see a little black tab assembly here that comes down and bolts into the back of this chassis panel here. You got one there and one here. We want to take those two screws out. These are the screws that have a big flat washer looking thing on the head. And now's the tricky part. Once those two screws are out, all the physical connections to the dome have been removed. However, there are still these double-sided tape foam tabs that are on the base of the dome rotation mechanism, and they will keep the dome attached until we gently pry it apart. And if you're planning on saving the chassis, maybe converting it to radio control or something, or just a static display, if you don't want to damage the chassis, you want to be careful. Prying, it'll eventually pop loose. Like that. And you can see the marks where the foam double-sided tape tabs were there. But that is all that's necessary to separate the dome out. So we have our dome assembly here. And we'll set that aside for now and come back to it. Now we're going to harvest parts out of the front of the chassis. We have the center microphone and the speaker. You likely will not be needing the speaker, but it's a standard 8-ohm speaker. You might have perhaps another use for it. So we're removing the 4 screws that are on this chassis panel on the interior of the front of the chassis. Once those 4 screws are removed, that panel just pulls clear. You want to route the center microphone wire through the hole in the top of the panel so you can pull the panel clear. Now your center microphone, you can see here in the top, it's got a little foam thing there to protect it. It's also mounted in a little foam ring, and you want to gently pry around that. They use a lot of glue and such to hold it in. So what you want to do is gently pry around here and maybe a slight tug on the wire until you can get that center microphone to clear. And there's our center microphone, and we definitely want to save this piece. If you choose to remove the speaker, it's behind these 3 screws here. If you pull this panel off, you can pry the speaker out. You may want to do that to use the speaker, or to use the wiring harness from the speaker, which we will be using to connect the audio connection on our board. So for our purposes here, I'm just going to snip the 2 speaker wires and pull that 1 connector out. And I'll set this aside. This is my audio connection wire. That concludes the harvesting of parts out of the front of the chassis, so I'm going to set this aside. Next, we're going to disassemble the dome and harvest the sensors that are contained inside that. If you turn the dome upside down and look under the dome rotation base, you'll see a series of 4 slots, the holes that are cut in there. And if you rotate it, you'll notice that you can line those 4 slots up with the 4 dome mounting screws that are down inside the red gear ring there. So we want to pull those 4 screws out next. And for operations such as this, it helps if you use a magnetic tip screwdriver. With those 4 screws removed, you can separate the top of the dome from the dome rotation base. This is the dome rotation base. It contains an optical encoder that reads the angular position of the dome as it rotates, and it also contains the dome rotation motor on the back side. This part needs to be saved intact just how it is if you plan on using this to keep the system running. You have an option of either using this base or using a custom-made base that I built. It's based on a radio control airplane servo motor, which is obviously much smaller than this. either way you need some sort of dome rotation encoder operating in order for the Hasbro system to continue to run. So for the time being, we'll assume that we're going to use this mechanism in the assembly, and we're going to save this and set it aside. The first step in removing the sensors from the dome is to remove the sensor assembly circuit board, which is right here. You can see the 4 mounting screws at each corner of the board. We'll be pulling those off and then separating the various wire connectors from the back of that. And with the 4 circuit board screws out, we'll pull the circuit board away from the dome and turn it over to reveal the various connectors. Most of the connectors are labeled, so it's easy to keep track of which ones are which. The only thing is that the Sonar wires, which are marked SONR or SONRX and SONTX, receive and transmit, it may be kind of hard to readily tell which wire is receive and transmit. So you might note somewhere that the Sonar receive is has a red wire, and the Sonar transmit has a white wire. And what I usually do is just take a Sharpie and put an R on the receive side and a W on the transmit side. All the other wires are labeled clearly, and you can go ahead and unplug the various plugs from the connectors. And once those connections are unplugged, you've separated the dome circuit board from the dome. And again, you want to protect this from static and any other physical hazards, and you want to set it aside someplace safe. Next, we're going to remove the left and right microphones from inside the dome. They're simply held in by these 2 screws on each bracket. Now we're going to remove the piezo mic, which is mounted to the top of the dome behind this bracket, which is held on with 2 screws. And that's the piezo microphone, which we're going to save. Next, we're going to remove the radar eye sensor assembly from the front of the dome. If you look inside the dome, you will see a series of screws with a larger head. 3 of them, they form sort of a triangle, 2 on the top and 1 in the center about the middle of the assembly. If we remove those 3 screws, the radar eye assembly will separate from the front of the dome, and the sensors will separate from the inside. And that separates everything from the dome. Now we can set the dome aside, as well as the radar eye. And what we have left is the front sensor assembly. It contains the LEDs for the front PSI light, the front hollow projector light LED here, the forward infrared sensor, which is here, and the forward sonar, which is here. So the first thing we're going to do is separate out the front PSI IR sensor and hollow projector lights, which are all coming off of this one board here. There's a single screw in the middle of it that we need to take out. We'll separate the wiring, and there's a bit of glue as well. In this assembly, the LED that comes in from the side here on the PSI will not fit back through the hole without being snipped. Once you have the board pulled back enough in here, you should be able to get a tool in there to cut those. Otherwise, you can use a soldering iron to melt the connections and be able to pull the assembly loose. And once that one is cut, you're able to pull loose your assembly. Now, all of these LED connections are going to be they're duplicated on the conversion board, so they're not needed. However, this infrared sensor is a very important part that must remain intact and must be saved. So we'll set this aside. Finally, we'll address the Sonar assembly, which I have not determined whether or not the voice control system will work with the Sonar unplugged. So I run the system with the Sonar plugged in. However, since it only has to do with operating the drive motors and such in autonomous mode, the Sonar really isn't used with the system as we use it. Nonetheless, since I want to retain it and have it plugged in, I do have it secured inside the dome next to the other circuit boards. Now, to make the assembly a little more compact, I remove the Sonar from the back of the radar eye assembly with the 3 screws you see here. So we're going to remove those 3 screws, and that will separate out the Sonar receive and transmit transducers just by themselves. And with those out of the way, the Sonar units simply pop out from the back. And again, we're going to save this so that we're able to plug these back into our board. And that concludes the disassembly and harvesting of parts from the Hasbro Interactive R2-D2. Again, to review the parts we pulled out, we'll work kind of in reverse order here. We have the Sonar assembly, the forward infrared sensor and PSI light assembly, the piezo microphone assembly, the left and right dome microphones, the main microphone, the center mic, the speaker wire harness, the dome sensor circuit board, and the main circuit board.